Their materials, researched and capped by a quarter of a century of original search by L. Ron Hubbard, have brought the humanities, so long outdistanced by the exact sciences, into a state of equality, if not superiority, to physics, chemistry, and mathematics. The most fundamental idea is called the cycle of action. Cycle means a span of time with a beginning and an end. A section of the totality of time with a beginning and an end. In beginningless and endless time, one can set out periods which do have a beginning and an end insofar as action is concerned. Action means motion or movement, an act, a consideration that motion has occurred. In very ancient books, it is written that from chaos came birth. From birth, there was growth. When growth was achieved, there was then a gradual decay. The decay then ended in death. After death, there was chaos. The cycle of action is an apparency as follows: create, then survive, then destroy. Or creation, survival, destruction. First, there is creation. This is then followed by survival. This is followed by destruction. Apparency means appears to be, as distinct from what actually is. This cycle is only an apparency. It is what we see, what we behold, what we believe. We consider that it is so, and we then see it so. A child is born, he grows, he reaches manhood, he grows old, he dies. It can be seen that none of these steps are necessary. One considers them so, and so they are true. A man can grow old quickly or slowly. He grows old to the degree that he believes he is growing old. Because everyone agrees that this is the way things are, they go that way. The cycle is not true. It is only apparent. It is apparent because we believe we see it. It is apparent because we agree that it should be so. The woman growing old, wishing to appear younger, is protesting this cycle of action. She feels there is something wrong with it. There is. We have to find out what the actual cycle is before we can make people better. Actual means what is really true. That which exists despite all apparencies. That which underlies the way things seem to be. The way things really are. The actual cycle of action is as follows. Create, 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 create. Create, counter-create. No creation, nothingness. Create means to make, manufacture, construct, postulate, bring into beingness, create. Create, create, create means to create again continuously, one moment after the next. Survive. Create, counter-create means to create something against a creation. To create one thing and then create something else against it. Destroy. No creation means an absence of any creation. No creative activity. An actual cycle of action, then, consists of various activities, but each and every one of them is creative. The cycle of action contains an apparency of survival. But this is actually only a continuous creation. Create, create, create. The apparent cycle of action contains destruction. But the actual cycle of action tells us what destruction is. Destruction is one of two activities. Destruction is, in terms of action, a creation of something against a creation of something else. Create, counter-create. For example, a wall is seen standing. To be apparent, it is necessary that the wall be constantly created. The act of destruction is to exert against the wall another creativeness. That is, the action or activity of knocking the wall down. Both the wall standing there and the action of knocking it down are creative actions. Because we may object to or dislike a wall being knocked down, we vilify the creativeness involved in knocking it down with the word destructive. Actuality tells us that there is no such thing as destruction. There is only creation against a creation. There is another type of destruction, and this is no more creation. No creation. By no longer being party to the wall's creation, the wall, in theory, can cease to exist for one. Reality means the way things appear. Reality is apparency. To do anything about reality, one must search into and discover what underlies the apparency. Of what does reality consist? We see an apparency which has the cycle of action of create, survive, destroy. More basically, this cycle of action contains nothing but creation. If one stops making something completely and ceases to be a party to its manufacture, it no longer exists for one. If one ceases to create, there is nothingness. When one creates something, or beholds something which is created, that thing is still being created. Even if one is creating something with his left hand and has forgotten about it with his right hand, the thing still exists. In other words, one can create something without knowing it is still being created. Then one seeks to destroy it by a counter-creation.
All right, you guys, bringing it down. Let's go. All right, stand back. Let's go.
The result is a chaos created by two opposing creations. Let us be practical. A theory is no good unless it works. All the fancy and beautiful theory in the world is useless unless it has a use or a workability. Is this cycle of action theory useful? It is. So long as we believe that we have to destroy with force in order to destroy at all, as long as we think in terms of destruction, we have chaos. There is creating and knowing one is creating. There is creating and not knowing one is creating. When one drives a car or a cart, he does many things which he is not aware of, and these we call automatic actions. One is doing something and is not aware that he is doing it. One starts to create something.
What do you call that, maggots? I don't call that running to you. Drop and give me 20.
Then places this thought, still active, beyond his own reach, and the creation continues to occur.
Pick up that knife. Come on, maggot. Pick that knife up. Drop and give me 20.
Knowingly creating something is always the first condition.
Drop and give me 20.
One can then purposefully continue the creation unknowingly.
3.7 seconds to get that started. I want you to get my change. I want you to get it for me right now. In fact, get down behind this counter and give me 20 push-ups, maggot, right now.
Everything one is doing, knowingly or unknowingly, one is doing here and now, in the present instant, in present time.
Now I'm going to give you 3.7 seconds to get started.
One knowingly started any creation in some past moment. But the creation is being done in the present moment.
Get that done. 2, 3, go! Go!
To stop any creation, it can be established that one once knew one was creating it, finding that thought and making it known again. Or one can simply create newly and consciously what one is already creating unconsciously, unknowingly. In either case, the creation stops. The wrong way is to start a new creation to counter against the old creation. When one does this, he gets confusion and chaos. A man has a job. He works at it. That is to say, he creates a job throughout the days, weeks, and years. As long as he makes a job, the job exists. One day, he depends upon, takes for granted, this job. He no longer creates it. It ceases to exist. He has no job. The apparency is that he loafed, became lazy, and was discharged. The actuality is that he no longer created a job, and so didn't have one. For example, a man depends upon a woman to keep his house for him. One day, he no longer has a woman. He can't keep house even though before he married the woman, he could keep house. For example, a man is sane. He gets the idea that it would be better to be insane. He starts to go insane, and then does numberless things in order to stay sane. Here, he was already creating the state of sanity. He counter-created insanity. He then counter-created sanity against insanity. Such tests come under the heading of processing. There are 3 conditions of existence. These 3 conditions comprise or make up life. They are be, do, and have. The first condition of existence is being. Being is defined as the assumption or choosing of a category of identity. It could be said to be the role in a game. An example of beingness could be one's own name. Another example would be one's profession. Another example would be one's physical characteristics. Each or all of these things could be called one's beingness. Beingness is assumed by oneself, or given to oneself, or is attained. For example, in the playing of a game, each player has his own beingness. The second condition of existence is doing. By doing, we mean action, function, accomplishment, the attainment of goals, the fulfilling of purpose, or any change of position in space. The third condition of existence is havingness. By havingness, we mean owning, possessing, being capable of commanding, positioning, taking charge of objects, energies, or spaces. The essential definition of having is to be able to touch or permeate, or to direct the disposition of. The game of life demands that one assumes a beingness in order to accomplish a doingness in the direction of havingness. These 3 conditions are given in an order of importance where life is concerned. The ability to be is more important than the ability to do. The ability to do is more important than the ability to have. In most people, all 3 conditions are sufficiently confused that they are best understood in reverse order. When one has clarified the idea of havingness or possession, one can then proceed to clarify doingness or general activity. And when this is done, one understands beingness or identity. It is essential to a successful existence that each of these 3 conditions be clarified and understood. The ability to assume or to grant beingness is probably the highest of human virtues. It is even more important to be able to permit other people to have beingness than to be able oneself to assume it. As one looks out across the confusion which is life, or existence to most people, one can discover 8 main divisions, to each of which apply the conditions of existence. Each division also contains a cycle of action. There could be said to be 8 urges, drives, impulses in life. These we call dynamics. These are motives or motivations. We call them the 8 dynamics. There is no thought or statement here that any one of these 8 dynamics is more important than the others. While they are categories of the broad game of life, they are not necessarily equal to each other. It will be found amongst individuals that each person stresses one of the dynamics more than the others, or may stress a combination of dynamics as more important than other combinations. The purpose in setting forth this division is to increase an understanding of life by placing it in compartments. Having subdivided existence in this fashion, each compartment can be inspected as itself and by itself in its relationship to the other compartments of life. In working a puzzle, it is necessary to first take pieces of similar color or character and place them in groups. In studying a subject, it is necessary to proceed in an orderly fashion. To promote this orderliness, it is necessary to assume, for our purposes, these 8 arbitrary compartments of life. The first dynamic is the urge toward existence as oneself. Here we have individuality expressed fully. This can be called the self dynamic. The second dynamic is the urge toward existence as a sexual activity. This dynamic actually has 2 divisions. Second dynamic A is the sexual act itself, and the second dynamic B is the family unit, including the rearing of children. This can be called the sex dynamic. The third dynamic is the urge toward existence in groups of individuals. Any group or part of an entire class could be considered to be a part of the third dynamic. The school, the society, the town, the nation are each part of the third dynamic, and each one is a third dynamic. This can be called the group dynamic. The fourth dynamic is the urge toward existence as or of mankind. Whereas one race would be considered a third dynamic, all the races would be considered the fourth dynamic. This can be called the mankind dynamic. The fifth dynamic is the urge toward existence of the animal kingdom. This includes all living things, whether vegetable or animal, the fish in the sea, the beasts of the field or of the forest, grass, trees, flowers, or anything directly and intimately motivated by life. This can be called the animal dynamic. The sixth dynamic is the urge toward existence as the physical universe. The physical universe is composed of matter, energy, space, and time. We take the first letter of each of these words and coin a word: MEST. This can be called the universe dynamic. The seventh dynamic is the urge toward existence as or of spirits. Anything spiritual, with or without identity, would come under the heading of the seventh dynamic. This can be called the spiritual dynamic. The eighth dynamic is the urge toward existence as infinity. This is also identified as the supreme being. This is called the eighth dynamic because the symbol of infinity, stood upright, makes the numeral 8. This can be called the infinity or God dynamic. Both the cycle of action and the three conditions of existence belong in each dynamic. They could best be represented as a series of concentric circles, wherein the first dynamic would be the center, and each new dynamic would be successively a circle outside it. The idea of space expanding enters into these dynamics. The basic characteristic of the individual includes his ability to so expand into the other dynamics. But when the seventh dynamic is reached in its entirety, one will only then discover the true eighth dynamic. One discovers that a baby at birth is not perceptive beyond the first dynamic. But as the child grows and interests extend, the child can be seen to embrace other dynamics. A person who is incapable of operating on the third dynamic is incapable at once of being a part of a team, and so might be said to be incapable of a social existence. No one of these dynamics from 1 to 7 is more important than any other one of them in terms of orienting the individual. While the dynamics are not of equal importance one to the next, the ability of an individual to assume the beingness, doingness, and havingness of each dynamic is an index to his ability to live. The abilities and shortcomings of individuals can be understood by viewing their participation in the various dynamics. There is a triangle of considerable importance, and an ability to use it gives a much greater understanding of life. The ARC triangle is the keystone of living associations. This triangle is the common denominator to all of life's activities. The first corner of the triangle is called affinity. The basic definition of affinity is the consideration of distance, whether good or bad. The most basic function of complete affinity would be the ability to occupy the same space as something else. The word affinity is here used to mean love, liking, or any other emotional attitude. Affinity is conceived to be something of many facets. Affinity is a variable quality. Affinity is here used as a word with the context degree of liking. Under affinity, we have the various emotional tones, ranged from the highest to the lowest. This is called the tone scale. These are in part serenity, the highest level, enthusiasm, conservatism, as we proceed downward towards the baser affinities, boredom, antagonism, anger, covert hostility, fear, grief, apathy. Below apathy, affinity proceeds into solidities such as matter. Affinity is conceived to be comprised first of thought, then of emotion, which contains energy particles, and then as a solid. The second corner of the triangle is reality. Reality could be defined as that which appears to be. Reality is fundamentally agreement. What we agree to be real is real. third corner of the triangle is communication. Communication is more important than the other two corners of the triangle. Communication is the solvent for all things. It dissolves all things. The interrelationship of the triangle becomes apparent at once when one asks, have you ever tried to talk to an angry man?
Fantastic design layout on this. You gotta take a look at it.
Without a high degree of liking and without some basis of agreement, there is no communication. Without communication and some basis of emotional response, there can be no reality. Without some basis for agreement and communication, there can be no affinity. Thus, we call these three things a triangle. Unless we have two corners of a triangle, there cannot be a third corner. Desiring any corner of the triangle, one must include the other two. The triangle is conceived to be very spacious at the level of serenity and completely condensed at the level of matter. Thus, to represent a scale for use, one would draw a large triangle with the high part of the scale and succeedingly smaller triangles down to a dot at the bottom of the scale. Affinity, reality, and communication are the basis of the Scientology tone scale, which gives a prediction of human behavior. The triangle is not an equilateral triangle. Affinity and reality are very much less important than communication. It might be said that the triangle begins with communication, which brings into existence affinity and reality. ARC are understanding. If you would continue a strong and able communication with someone, there must be some basis for agreement. There must be some liking for the person. And then communication can exist. We can see then that simple talking and writing randomly without knowledge of this would not necessarily be communication. Communication is essentially something which is sent and which is received. The intention to send and the intention to receive must both be present in some degree before an actual communication can take place. Therefore, one could have conditions which appear to be communications, which were not. The ARC triangle, understood, is an extremely useful tool or weapon in human relationships. For instance, amongst the ARC triangle laws, a communication to be received must approximate the affinity level of the person to whom it is directed. As people descend the tone scale, they become more and more difficult to communicate with, and things with which they will agree become more and more solid. Thus, we have friendly discourses high on the scale and war at the bottom. Where the affinity level is hate, the agreement is solid matter, and the communication, bullets. life can best be understood by likening it to a game. Since we are exterior to a great number of games, we can regard them with a detached eye. If we were exterior to life, instead of being involved and immersed in the living of it, it would look to us much like games look to us from our present vantage point. Despite the amount of suffering, pain, misery, sorrow, and travail which can exist in life, the reason for existence is the same reason as one has to play a game. Interest, contest, activity, and possession. The truth of this assertion is established by an observation of the elements of games, and then applying these elements to life itself. When we do this, we find nothing left wanting in a panorama of life. By game, we mean contest of person against person or team against team. When we say games, we mean such games as baseball, polo, chess, or any other such pastime. It may at one time have struck you peculiar that men would risk bodily injury in the field of play just for the sake of amusement. So it might strike you as peculiar that people would go on living or would enter into the game of life at the risk of all the sorrow, travail, and pain, just to have something to do. Evidently, there is no greater curse than total idleness. Of course, there is that condition where a person continues to play a game in which he is no longer interested. If you will but look about the room and check off items in which you are not interested, you will discover something remarkable. In a short time, you will find that there is nothing in the room in which you are not interested. You are interested in everything.
An empty silver cup.
However, disinterest itself is one of the mechanisms of play. In order to hide something, it is only necessary to make everyone disinterested in the place where the item is hidden. Disinterest is not an immediate result of interest which is worn out.
He's not done well all season. He's coming back from
Disinterest is a commodity in itself. It is palpable. It exists.
Who was once a star player of this game, Collins, who right now does not look like the happiest man on the field. He's had a rough year, a lot of injuries, a lot of mistakes. You can tell he's dejected. He's not got the old fire that he used to have.
By studying the elements of games, we find ourselves in possession of the elements of life.
Potential. Now, wait a minute. He's starting to go downfield. It looks like he's got the ball. And he's starting to make some kind of a move here. Yes, it looks like he's going for it. He's going all the way. And this is a risky move, folks. I can't believe he's even going to attempt it. This is something completely unexpected. Isn't going to work. He shoots. And he scores! What a comeback!
Life is a game. A game consists of freedom, barriers, and purposes. This is a scientific fact, not merely an observation. freedom exists amongst barriers. A totality of barriers and a totality of freedom alike are no-game conditions. Each is similarly cruel. Each is similarly purposeless. When the relation between freedom and barriers becomes too unbalanced, an unhappiness results. Freedom from is all right, only so long as there is a place to be free to.
Sweetie, come on.
An endless desire for freedom from is a perfect trap. A fear of all things. Barriers are composed of inhibiting ideas, space, energy, masses, and time. Freedom, in its entirety, would be a total absence of these things. But it would also be a freedom without thought or action, an unhappy condition of total nothingness. Fixed on too many barriers, man yearns to be free. But launched into total freedom, he is purposeless and miserable. There is freedom amongst barriers. If the barriers are known and the freedoms are known, there can be life, living, happiness, a game. The restrictions of a government or a job give an employee his freedom. Without known restrictions, an employee is a slave doomed to the fears of uncertainty in all his actions. Executives in business and government can fail in three ways and thus bring about a chaos in their department. They can seem to give endless freedom, seem to give endless barriers, make neither freedom nor barriers certain. Executive competence, therefore, consists of imposing and enforcing an adequate balance between their people's freedom and the unit's barriers, and in being precise and consistent about those freedoms and barriers.
Onward. Hey, notebook.
Such an executive, adding only in himself initiative and purpose, can have a department with initiative and purpose. An employee buying and or insisting upon freedom only will become a slave. He must insist upon a workable balance between freedom and barriers. Pan-determinism. This could be loosely defined as determining the activities of two or more sides in a game simultaneously. For instance, a person playing chess is being self-determined and is playing chess against an opponent. A person who is pan-determined on the subject of chess could play both sides of the board. A being is pan-determined about any game to which he is senior. He is self-determined only in a game to which he is junior. For instance, a general of an army is pan-determined concerning an argument between two privates or even two companies of his command.
The fight's not down here, it's out there!
He is pan-determined in this case. But when he confronts another army, led by another general, he becomes self-determined. The game, in this wise, could be said to be larger than himself. The game becomes even larger than this when the general seeks to play the parts of all the political heads which should be above him. This is the main reason why dictatorship doesn't work. It is all but impossible for one man to be pan-determined about the entire system of games which comprise a nation. He starts taking sides, and then, to that degree, becomes much less than the government which he is seeking to run. Although man continually uses freedom for his war cry, he only succeeds in establishing further entrapment for himself. The reason for this is a very simple one. A game consists of freedom and barriers and purposes. When man drops the idea of restrictions or barriers, he loses at once control over barriers. He becomes self-determined about barriers and not pan-determined. Thus, he cannot control the barriers. The barriers, left uncontrolled, trap him then and there. The dwindling spiral of the apparency, create, survive, destroy, comes about directly when man shuns barriers. If he considers all restrictions and barriers his enemies, he is of course refusing to control them in any way, and thus he starts his own dwindling spiral.
No barriers.
A race which is educated to think in terms of freedom only is very easily entrapped. No one in the nation will take responsibility for restrictions. Therefore, restrictions apparently become less and less. Actually, they become more and more. As these restrictions lessen, so lessens the freedom of the individual. One cannot be free from a wall unless there is a wall. Lacking any restrictions, life becomes purposeless, random, chaotic.
Bill, time's money.
A good manager must be capable of taking responsibility for restrictions. In that freedom to exist must have barriers, a failure to take initiative on the subject of restrictions or barriers causes them to arise all by themselves and exist without consent or direction. There are various states of mind which bring about happiness.
Stop! Would you stop?
That state of mind which insists only upon freedom can bring about nothing but unhappiness. It would be better to develop a thought pattern which looked for new ways to be entrapped and things to be trapped in than to suffer the eventual total entrapment of dwelling upon freedom only.
Yes.
A man who is willing to accept restrictions and barriers and is not afraid of them is free. A man who does nothing but fight restrictions and barriers will usually be trapped. As it can be seen in any game, purposes become counterposed. There is a matter of purpose, counterpurpose in almost any game played in a field with two teams. One team has the idea of reaching the goal of the other, and the other has the idea of reaching the goal of the first. Their purposes are at war, and this warring of purposes makes a game. The war of purposes gives us what we call problems. A problem has the anatomy of purposes. A problem consists of two or more purposes opposed. It does not matter what problem you face or have faced, the basic anatomy of that problem is purpose counterpurpose. In actual testing, it has been discovered that a person begins to suffer from problems when he does not have enough of them. There is the old saw that if you want a thing done, give it to a busy man to do. Similarly, if you want a happy associate, make sure that he is a man who can have lots of problems. From this, we get the oddity of a high incidence of neurosis in the families of the rich. These people have very little to do and have very few problems. The basic problems of food, clothing, and shelter are already solved for them. We would suppose, then, if it were true that an individual's happiness depended only upon his freedom, these people would be happy. However, they are not happy. What brings about their unhappiness? It is the lack of problems. An unhappy man is one who is considering continually how to become free. One sees this in the clerk who is continually trying to avoid work. Although he has a great deal of leisure time, he is not enjoying any part of it. He is trying to avoid contact with people, objects, energies, and spaces. He eventually becomes trapped in a sort of lethargy. If this man could merely change his mind and start worrying about how he could get more work to do, his happiness level would increase markedly. One who is plotting continually how to get out of things will become miserable. One who is plotting how to get into things has a much better chance of becoming happy. There is, of course, the matter of being forced to play games in which one has no interest. A war into which one is drafted is an excellent example of this. One is not interested in the purposes of the war, and yet one finds himself fighting it. Thus, there must be an additional element. And this element is the power of choice. One could say then that life is a game, and that the ability to play a game consists of tolerance for freedom and barriers, and an insight into purposes, with the power of choice over participation. These four elements, freedom, barriers, purposes, and power of choice, are the guiding elements of life. There are only two factors above these, and both of them are related to these. The first is the ability to create, with of course its negative, the ability to uncreate. And the second is the ability to make a postulate, to consider, to say a thing and have it be true. This, then, is the broad picture of life, and in bringing life into focus and in making it less confusing, these elements are used in its understanding. The individual man is divisible into three parts. The first of these is the spirit called the Thetan. The second of these parts is the mind. The third of these parts is the body. Probably the greatest discovery has been the isolation, description, and handling of the human spirit. It has been established that that thing which is the person, the personality, is separable from the body and the mind at will and without causing bodily death or mental derangement. The Thetan, spirit, is described as having no mass, no wavelength, no energy, and no time or location in space, except by consideration or postulate. The spirit, then, is not a thing. It is the creator of things. The usual residence of the Thetan is in the skull or near the body. A Thetan can be in one of four conditions. The first would be entirely separate from a body or bodies, or even from this universe. The second would be near a body and knowingly controlling the body. The third would be in the body, the skull. And the fourth would be an inverted condition, whereby he is compulsively away from the body and cannot approach it. There are degrees of each one of these four states. The most optimum of these conditions, from the standpoint of man, is the second. A Thetan is subject to deterioration. This is at first difficult to understand, since the entirety of his activity consists of considering or postulating. He uses, through his postulates, various methods of controlling a body. That he does deteriorate is manifest. But that he can at any moment return to an entirety of his ability is also factual. In that he associates beingness with mass and action, he does not consider himself as having an individual identity or name unless he is connected with one or more of the games of life. And place him in the second condition, near a body and knowingly controlling the body, since it has been discovered that he is happier and more capable when so situated. The mind is a communication and control system between the Thetan and his environment. A Thetan establishes various systems of control so that he can continue to operate a body and, through the body, operate things in the physical universe as well as other bodies. The most obvious portion of the mind is recognizable by anyone not in serious condition. This is the mental image picture. We call this mental image picture a facsimile when it is a photograph of the physical universe sometime in the past. We call this mental image picture a mock-up when it is created by the Thetan or for the Thetan and does not consist of a photograph of the physical universe. We call a mental image picture a hallucination, or more properly, an automaticity, something uncontrolled when it is created by another and seen by self. Various phenomena connect themselves with this entity called the mind. Some people closing their eyes see only blackness. Some people see pictures. Some people see pictures made by body reactions. Some people see only black screens. Others see golden lines. Others see spaces. But the keynote of the entirety of the system called the mind is postulate and perception. The mind has three main divisions. The first of these could be called the analytical mind. The second, the reactive mind. And the third, the somatic mind. The analytical mind combines perceptions of the immediate environment, of the past via pictures, and estimations of the future into conclusions which are based upon the realities of situations. The analytical mind combines the potential knowingness of the Thetan with the conditions of his surroundings and brings him to independent conclusions.
Come on, fast. Good job.
This mind could be said to consist of visual pictures, either of the past or the physical universe, monitored by and presided over by the knowingness of a Thetan. The keynote of the analytical mind is awareness. One knows what one is concluding and knows what he is doing. The reactive mind is a stimulus-response mechanism. Ruggedly built and operable in trying circumstances, the reactive mind never stops operating. Pictures of a very low order are taken by this mind of the environment, even in some states of unconsciousness. The reactive mind acts below the level of consciousness.
You gonna be okay if you breathe again?
It is the literal stimulus response mind.
Hey, give me some room. I can't breathe.
Given a certain stimulus, it gives a certain response.
Give me some room. I can't breathe.
The entire subject of Dianetics concerns itself mainly with this one mind. While it is an order of thinkingness, the ability of the reactive mind to conclude rationally is so poor that we find in the reactive mind those various aberrated impulses which are gazed upon as oddities of personality, eccentricities, neuroses, and psychoses.
Sit back down, dude. You have no idea what's going on.
Sit down.
You know who I am, dude?
Let's go. This is sick. I'm getting sick of you too. Get out of my
I think so. I'll teach you lessons.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do the thing. Come on. Come on. Let's go.
It is this mind which stores up all the bad things that have happened to one and throws them back to him again in moments of emergency or danger, so as to dictate his actions along lines which have been considered safe before.
Jump already.
As there is little thinkingness involved in this, the courses of action dictated by the reactive mind are often not safe, but highly dangerous.
Lean forward for me.
The reactive mind is entirely literal in its interpretation of words and actions.
Well, your lungs are clear. There's no infiltrates.
As it takes pictures and receives impressions during moments of unconsciousness, a phrase uttered when a blow is struck
Give me some room. I can't breathe.
is likely to be literally interpreted by the reactive mind and become active upon the body and analytical mind at later times.
Lungs are clear.
The mildest stage of this would be arduous training, wherein a pattern is laid into the mind for later use under certain given stimuli. A harsher and less workable level is the hypnotic trance condition, to which the mind is susceptible. Made impressionable by fixed attention, words can be immediately implanted into the reactive mind, which become operable under re-stimulation at later times. An even lower level in the reactive mind is that one associated with blows, drugs, illness, pain, and other conditions of unconsciousness. The third portion of the mind is the somatic mind. This is an even heavier type of mind than the reactive mind, since it contains no thinkingness and contains only actingness. The impulses placed against the body by the thetan through various mental machinery arrive at the voluntary, involuntary, and glandular levels. These have set methods of analysis for any given situation, and so respond directly to commands given. Unfortunately, the somatic mind is subject to each of the minds higher in scale above it and to the thetan. In other words, the thetan can independently affect the somatic mind. The analytical mind can affect the somatic mind. The reactive mind can affect the somatic mind. Thus we see that the neurons, the glandular system, the muscles, and masses of the body are subject to various impulses, each one of a lower order than the next. Thus, it is not odd to discover what we call psychosomatic illness. A condition exists here where the thetan does not have an awareness of burdening the somatic mind with various commands or derangements.
Get in the room, I can't breathe!
Neither does the thetan have an awareness of his own participation in the analytical mind, causing this action against the body. In that the thetan is seldom aware of the reactive mind, it is possible then for the reactive mind, with its stimulus-response content, to impinge itself directly.
Oh, my leg hurts.
And without further recourse or advice, upon the neurons, muscles, and glandular system of the body. In that the reactive mind can hold a fixed command in place, causing a derangement in the somatic mind, it is possible then for illness to exist, for bizarre pains to be felt, for actual physical twists and aberrations to occur without any conscious knowledge on the part of the thetan. This we call physical illness caused by the mind. In brief, such illness is caused by perceptions received in the reactive mind during moments of pain and unconsciousness.
Oh, my leg hurts.
Give me some room, I can't breathe!
Whether the facsimile in the mind is received while the thetan is awake or unconscious, the resulting mass of the energy picture is energy. Just as you see energy in an electric light bulb or from the flames of a fire. At one time, it was considered that mental energy was different from physical energy. It has been discovered that mental energy is simply a finer, higher level physical energy. Energy is energy. It has different wavelengths and different characteristics. The mental image pictures are capable of reacting upon the physical environment, and the physical environment is capable of reacting upon mental image pictures. Thus, the mind actually consists of spaces, energies, and masses of the same order as the physical universe, if lighter and different in size and wavelength. The third part of man is the physical body. This can best be studied in such books as Gray's Anatomy and other anatomical texts. The body is a purely structural study, and the actions and reactions amongst its various structures are complex and intensely interesting. It was discovered that a fixed electrical field existed surrounding a body entirely independent of but influenceable by the human mind. The body exists in its own space. That space is created by anchor points, points which are anchored in a space different to the physical universe space around a body. The complexity of these anchor points can cause an independent series of electronic flows which can occasion much discomfort to the individual. The balance structure of the body and even its joint action and physical characteristics can be changed by changing this electrical field, which exists at a distance from or within the body. The electrical field is paramount and monitors the actual physical structure of the body. Thus, the body is not only influenced by the three minds, it is influenced as well by its own electrical field. The use of electrical shocks upon a body for any purpose is therefore very dangerous and is not condoned by sensible men. A knowledge of the mental and physical structure of the body would be necessary in order to treat the body. And this knowledge has not existed prior to. The medical doctor achieved many results by working purely with structure and biochemical products. And in the field of emergency surgery and obstetrics and orthopedics, he is indispensable in the society. Medicine, however, did not even contain a definition for mind, and is not expected to invade the field which belongs, properly, to religion. These three parts of man, the thetan, the mind, and the body, are each one different studies, but they influence each other markedly and continually. Of the three, the senior entity is the thetan, for without the thetan, there would be no mind or animation in the body, while without a body or a mind, there is still animation and life in the thetan. The thetan is the person. You are you in a body.